Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Now, today's talk, it's on the day that I talk about inner child processes, is called carrying. So basically, children who assume too much responsibility. So really, what is carrying? So it's an emotional term, and I've written a sentence here which kind of explains it. And it basically is that carrying happens when children experience verisimilitude but not the entire truth, and then they shape their futures on this inaccuracy. So what do I mean by that? Carrying happens when children experience verisimilitude but not the entire truth, and then they shape their futures on this inaccuracy. Well, it has everything to do with children and their upbringing and their perceptions and what they do with those inaccurate perceptions and how they mold their personality, their beliefs, and their futures. Now, when children experience verisimilitude or something that's very similar, but it's not the real truth, they're going to make big mistakes. And then if they have certain personality types, they're going to assume too much responsibility or assume too much inaccuracy about their world schema, about their whole three-dimensional matrix, or how, and that's where the problem lies. So some spiritual people talk about fifth dimension, they talk about the three-dimensional matrix, and what are they talking about? Well, I think it's all ideological, but basically what they're saying and what I'm expressing here is that these inaccuracies of perception in children create all the problems in the world, and a lot of that has to do with various child rearing styles and child rearing experiences that are problematic. And we can see that happening in some of the release of the new information recently about Hunter Biden's computer or cell phone in the iCloud. And there's even extracts of Ashley Biden's diary when she believes she might have been sexualized too much by having, showers with her dad. And Hunter Biden even refers to his own dad as being pedo Peter. So what you're seeing here is that children that didn't get the ideal parenting that they maybe should have, and then all the problems that, like a snowball rolling down the hill, all the problems that eventuate as a result. And you can see Hunter Biden, his drug behavior with pee and prostitutes and so forth. And I won't go into that because I'm not here to slam the left by any means. But I'm talking about child rearing. But most importantly, I'm also wanting to talk about what happens inside you as an adult when you have to negotiate and heal and validate and nurture, and then you have to re-educate your own inner child in order to become a wholesome and healthy person. So going back to basics. So this verisimilitudinous experience where children are experiencing a very similar version of the truth, but not the real truth. So if you think about that, I just want you to take yourself back to some of your earliest memories and your perceptions. So, how did you perceive your parents? How did you formulate your earliest moral ideas? How did you develop your virtues? Well, you will have learnt all of them, most of that, from your parents. Now, some of it, if you're a highly evolved soul, of course, will just sort of bleed through from your soul, from your reincarnation, your past experiences of who you are. That is true. But a lot of it we learnt from our parents. So I want to talk about some examples. What would be some examples of carrying? Well, children that grow up with parents that are criminals. If you think about this, if you've got, parents that are, they're pickpocketers, or if you think about David Copperfield with Fagin, Fagin told the little children to go out there and pickpocket and bring money back to Fagin. Well, then those children who have got criminalized parents, they're going to form a twisted verisimilitude version of reality. They're not going to get the real reality. They're going to get the modified version from their parents, who are now criminals, and then forcing their children to shift and change their perception of morality towards something that is highly inaccurate. Also, children that grow up with parents that are highly over-sexualized. If you've got, hippie parents that, have sex on the kitchen table in front of their children, and there's actually a commune down the road, it used to be called Centrepoint, where that actually happened, that children were overly sexualized, and which is a very extreme version, but that creates a problem. And what I mentioned earlier, like, why would Hunter Biden refer to his father as pedo Peter? Okay, and I don't want to get too slamming towards the left, because that's not where I'm coming from, because I'm left-wing myself. What about children that grow up with parents who are very weak? Parents that just don't take a stand, or parents that don't have courage, or a father that comes home from work and he says that he's had an argument with his boss in front of the children at the dinner table, and they just folded and they didn't ask for a raise or stand up for themselves. Then those children are going to assume values on not coping with weakness and not standing up for yourself and not taking a stand. So, sometimes these children can also grow up too fast, and they can become overly responsible, and also they can also become anxious, or also go the other way and overcompensate. If you think about the Michael J. Fox character in the television series Family Ties, his parents were very left-wing and hippie, and then he was uncomfortable and anxious with that relaxed, laissez-faire parenting style, and Michael J. Fox character in Family Ties walked around in a suit everywhere, and he became conservative. So some of your political leanings, well, most of your political leanings, can have a lot to do with how you were parented and how you perceived your parents. So anyway, there's a really, really good television series that I've just been watching, an English television series called Sherwood, and I won't go into any long ramifications, but suffice to say, it was about a mining town in Nottingham. And in this mining town, anyway, long story short, there was a father who was very weak in his personality, so the son went around shooting arrows at everybody, and and taking a position to stand up for the abuse towards his father that he perceived. So he experienced verisimilitude, i.e. he experienced a version of his weakened father's morality, and then he twisted that and became like a Sherwood, Robin Hood character upon himself, which was inaccurate, and that created all those problems. So anyway, it's a really good series, and I recommend you see it. And it's almost like children grow up in a kind of a Stockholm syndrome. They basically see problems of morality with their parents, and they see that things are not right, but they have to love their parents, and they experience this ambivalence because they see their parents either being weak or being anxious, and parents who have mental illness, people who have drug use. I have a client or a friend / client that has got a family member that has schizophrenia most of their life, and this has molded and modified the way this child has now become an adult, and the way that they try extra hard to help people based on one of their parents becoming a schizophrenic most of their life, and it molded them. And so that person will do what I call carrying. When you feel that your shoulders are too heavy and you've taken on too much responsibility. Now, some would say that there are benefits, and of course there are benefits to carrying, because a lot of these people that assume too much responsibility, they become wonderful therapists and healers and doctors, and work in caring professions, and can become community support workers for disabilities and all sorts of things, and even politicians. So, but what do we do about carrying when it's us or our clients and it's just too much, and you feel burdened and heavy from that experience, and you can't experience the joy of life? What do you do? So some children, when they become too responsible, or some children, if they're too spiritually highly evolved, will do this. They'll carry too much, and then there's no joy anymore, and then there's only the role. So if you think about this, ask yourself the question spiritually: am I you? Are you experiencing the full expression of who you're meant to be? Are you experiencing life without any interference from your upbringing? Are you experiencing life as God intended, or as your soul intended? Now, chances are you're probably not, but it would be nice if you could. But what's getting in the way? Well, what is getting in the way is this carrying phenomena. Too much responsibility, too much inaccuracies in your childhood. And then what do you do? How do you fix that? One of the best ways to fix that is to educate your inner child, or educate yourself. And education can take that slanted view, that's my favourite word today, verisimilitude, that slanted verisimilitude, that very similar perception of a reality that's now inaccurate, and you can bring it back to centre through educating yourself. And it also requires a lot of love and nurturing. So some people talk about, letting go, or just give it up to God, and that's a really good thing to do as well. But sometimes it's quite hard. If you've got shame and guilt and self-hatred and self-blame and suicidal ideations, a lot of that can come from this carrying phenomenon. So if you think about, the very, very negative times in your life when you're very slanted in your views, there will be some inappropriate carrying on your shoulders of how you're treating yourself, and you're not letting yourself off the hook. And I know myself, I've done a lot of this, and I think a lot of highly moral and a lot of highly evolved souls who are spiritual, or wanting to help, or wanting to heal the planet. I mean, it's a kind of common phenomena with millennials, right now, that everybody feels so anxious about the planet, about, bees dying and pollinating, and, sea level rises and global warming. And we've got TMI, we've got too much information, we've got the internet, we've got social media, we've got Twitter, and we're just overwhelmed with too much information. And how do you get an accurate perception of reality, but not a verisimilitude or a very similar version, which is taking something as real, but you're making a mistake? How do you do that with your politics? How do you do that with Roe and Wade? With women's right to choose? How do you do that with when you watch a video by Jordan Peterson? He's ranting and raving against the Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau. How do you find the accurate truth and not a version of it? And then the carrying effect that you do when you formulate all your political views and all your attitudes and all your beliefs. And it can feel very heavy. And, like this young man in this television series called Sherwood, it overwhelmed him so much that he saw his father suffering, that he carried that responsibility, and he practiced using a bow and arrow, and he went around shooting people to try and get revenge. So, getting back to you and what you can do here right now is that you can nurture and love yourself and try and educate yourself into the nature of reality. And I recommend you can do that a number of different ways. You can get on YouTube and you can watch various political persuasions. You can listen to Joe Biden speak. You can listen to Donald Trump speak, even if you don't like him. You can educate yourself in religion. You can educate yourself in child psychology or developmental psychology. And you can also do your own healing. If you're carrying emotions and responsibilities from a very particular slanted version of child rearing that you had, think about your parents. Think about their historical background, their cohort, their culture. Are they, like my family, a product of World War II, where my mother was bombed by Hitler, and she had to hide under the table 3 times. They had to dig her out, with all the rubble. And she formulated her attitudes that way. And her father hopped in her bed late at night and almost molested her, and she ran off into the street, in a nightie, and then they put her in a boarding home because there was no one else to stay, and she slept in a bath in a flat in London and worked as a waitress, and she had a really hard life, and she formulated all of her beliefs, which were very permissive and kind of hippie-like, and she broke away. So just think about child-rearing styles and how you formulated your beliefs, and whether or not you felt guilty about ambivalence, about being angry at your mother or father for not, rearing yourself appropriately. And as you can see right now with Hunter Biden's behavior and how he feels about his father, Joe Biden, and also Ashley Biden is, showing examples in her own personal diary. I mean, that's what we get with social media. We get so much information now. We know everything. So carrying is when you're being too responsible or too much emotional pain, and this has molded you as an adult, and you're not living in the accurate reality that you could live in. And if you're very slanted, you could be engaging in a verisimilitudinous reality, but not the real reality or the accurate reality. So just think about that. Accuracy, carrying emotions, carrying responsibilities, self-hatred, a deluded self-perception of yourself. One thing that's helped me really, really recently is I've been, and I do this a lot, so I challenge myself to interact in various groups that I wouldn't ordinarily, and I did this particularly in my spirituality. And I won't go on about this too long, but what I recommend you do is that if you get invites from sorts of people from your past or various groups that is not entirely exactly in alignment with your political persuasions or your belief systems, challenge yourself and meet these people. I've been to Sai Baba meetings, where everybody in the whole entire room is Indian, from India or Fiji, and they're singing bhajans. And I've been in North London, and I belong to a Sufi group where everybody was from Tehran, Iran. And it's really, really helpful to get a well-rounded view of life experience. And then in terms of carrying emotional responsibility, try and love yourself, give yourself a break, lighten up sometimes. I have a tendency to be really, really heavy on myself and very, very heavy intellectually or morally, or I'm very earnest. There was a book by someone Wilde, I forget his last name, called The Importance of Being Earnest. And so if you are in the importance of being too earnest with everything you do, you might need to lighten up and not carry everybody and carry the world on your shoulders like Atlas. Atlas. So think about that. How much are you carrying? And then if you're a parent and you have children, watch your children's behavior when you're rearing them. Find out or perceive when your child is carrying. So how can you do that? If you have a child and you're rearing them and you see their eyebrows go together and they're being really serious, or they feel very wounded when you tell them off, and then you can see their thoughts and belief systems are starting to mold and turning them into a personality and a character, make sure that you're sensitive enough not to give them TMI, too much information, or too much responsibility, or too hard on themselves, too hard on them. Caroline says, isn't there an energetic reality to this? You'll have to formulate the question more precisely, because when you say energetic, everything is energetic. I'm not quite sure what you're talking about, Caroline. But I just want to talk about child rearing, because if you're in a position as a parent, this is obviously highly important. And I've lost my train of thought, and I'll try and come back to it, so apologies, Caroline. Yes, so I'm just trying to get my head together. I lost my train of thought. Child rearing. So there's something very important I wanted to say about child rearing, and it's just like slipped my brain. That happens sometimes. It might come back. I usually talk, and then about 30 seconds later it pops in my brain again when I'm relaxed. So yes, so carrying is a very heavy experience. If you're too moral or too highly evolved or too responsible, carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. And I have that tendency. It's a really, really bad in me. It had a lot to do with seeing my father. Went into a mental hospital, had electric shock therapy. I didn't see him for 6 months, and I was really worried. I was in an abusive foster home, and I kept asking my foster mother, like, when am I going to see my dad? Where's my dad? When's he coming out of hospital? And right then, I became a carrier of the weight of the world on my shoulders, and I failed, and I felt like I was a failure because I couldn't rescue my father. I couldn't get to him, and it brought up a huge amount of sadness for me, and it formulated all of my perceptions towards my father and the entire world, and I still do it today. I still belong to a car club where I try to meet men to show them love, kindness and compassion because I'm trying to rescue them, and I'm a rescuer, and I'm all doing that because my father was in a mental hospital and I couldn't help him when I was 5 years old. So think about carrying, and if you're a parent in that position where you see children that are developing in this way, try and be aware. Sorry, as in just thinking differently about it, is it not always enough to shift it? We need to also identify where it sits in your body and let it go. So yes, Caroline's talking about the energetic storage of energy, like the solar plexus stores emotional pain. Some people say that childhood or guilt or feelings or emotions in your childhood are stored in your calf muscles. So some people do get Reiki and various types of healing that energetically finds where this energy is stored and blocked, and that is true. If you work energetically, that's perfectly correct, and so I agree with Caroline. So just around these child rearing styles, I had something very this is what I want to say. This is hugely important. Child rearing styles have really, really changed a lot in this regard, and what I mean is that what information you divulge, and as a parent, how much do you share and tell your children. And I think it's healthier to tell them very little and keep them in the dark. And that sounds really weird. Well, Edward, why would you say that? Why would you want to keep your children in the dark? That doesn't sound very progressive. That doesn't sound very intelligent or educational or helpful or and I just make sure you understand me on this. But what I'm saying is that children need to be children. Children need to be able to endure, or not endure, but be engaged in the nature of innocence. The innocence of childhood is hugely important. And this is where the dysfunctional problems happen when, let's say hypothetically, there's lots and lots of examples. Let's say you're driving along in your car and you go to a gas station, and then you get treated badly by the man with the petrol pump, and you get in the car and you've got a 3 or 5-year-old in the seat, and you say, "Oh, that man was a real dickhead arsehole, shortchanged me on my petrol prices. What do you think? Do you agree he's a bit of an idiot, isn't it?" And obviously, if you're a 5-year-old and your daddy's telling you, this man's an idiot, but I'm always taught that I'm supposed to respect my elders, and I learnt that from Sunday school, but my dad's telling me that this guy's an idiot, and I want to be moral and I want to love people, but now my dad's making me feel pressurized because I've got to honor the mother and father. So then you're torn. So children at a very, very young age, at 3, 4, 5 years old, are being literally torn apart emotionally, because if parents divulge too much information that only basically adults speak, then it's going to cause ambivalence and lots of problems. So I personally believe that parents shouldn't discuss money, shouldn't discuss bills, shouldn't talk adult talk in front of the children. And I don't know enough about modern day child rearing attitudes to voice on this, but I think I know a little bit enough. And I think years ago, parents didn't speak in front of the children. They didn't overly sexualize them. They didn't talk about bills and money. They didn't talk about Bert Nooney down the road, who was a bleep, bleep, bleep. They didn't swear. They didn't use bad language. So they allowed children to experience the innocence of youth to protect them. Now, why would you do this? It's hugely important, and that's because children do not have the wisdom and maturity and life experience to balance and weigh scenarios up. So if a parent says, so-and-so's a real idiot, I wish I could kill that guy, well, the child experiences a more black and white either or version of reality, and if a parent says that, the child's going to be terrified, because it experiences that nature of innocence. I mean, I remember when I was young and I was watching TV and I was watching Star Trek, and a woman transformed, with really bad, special effects. She transformed into a hairy monster, and I was terrified, and I was crying and screaming, and my dad, had to cover my eyes, when the scary bits came on. And so children, they don't have that wisdom and maturity, so they need to be protected from TMI, or too much information, or adult information. So adults shouldn't be talking about sex, they shouldn't be talking about money, they shouldn't even be slagging someone off down the road, they shouldn't be swearing and using bad language. That's my personal opinion. And it's not overly Christian, it's not Sunday school, that's not what I'm preaching. But I think a lot of sensible parents believe this. I think maybe this is just very, very common sense. Maybe I'm just preaching to the converted, so apologies if I'm stating the bleeding obvious. But I think if there are problems with children carrying too much responsibility and getting an inaccurate version of the truth, and then shaping their whole moral development on this inaccuracy, that's why, as I mentioned about Hunter Biden and Ashley Biden and some of the problems with modern parenting. So I think I've said enough. I think it's pretty clear the way I've explained everything. But if you're a parent bringing up your children, or if you're a human being yourself and you assume too much responsibility and you're too intelligent or too moral or too virtuous or too hard on yourself, or you're spiritual but you're not growing and developing, you might have self-blame, self-hatred, self-denial, self-punishment, or any of those symptoms. And this carrying phenomenon from your childhood of being having too much information that you couldn't cope with, because you didn't have the intelligence and the wisdom to know how to deal with that, that could be the reason. And nurturing yourself and educating yourself and loving your inner child and giving it to God and letting it all go is all part of the process. And my word for today, sorry about that, I normally turn notifications off. My fun word for today is verisimilitude. It comes from veri, which is veritas, which is truth, and similitude, obviously similar. So this truth appearing similar. So that's it. Said enough. Finished. Enjoy your day. This goes on YouTube. Hit those notifications. Love you all. Bless you.